I'm finally starting to close in on some of the finishing touches, what will be the finishing touches before the actual finishing touches of this rebuild. The steps from this point on are going to be get the subfloor leveled, get the floor installed, get the doors and trim on, get those sprayed, then I can paint the walls, then I can get cabinets in, and then I can get like all the switches and cover plates and like really finishing decoration bits in. So it's getting close, but the next big job, like I said, is getting the floor leveled. I've already put a video out somewhere over here about how I leveled floors in the basement, but I've come up with a much better way on how to level floors, especially when you've got wood subfloors instead of concrete floors. You can see through this hallway and into the master bedroom there, I've already done one pass of leveling, and I actually got it through this room here too, through basically the entire back half of the house. I have a pretty good point of reference so that I can get this floor to be the same height, same level as all the floor out there. So I'm going to go through and show you how that happens here. The first step is coming along with my laser level. I've got a point on the floor that I'll show you right after, but we get this guy turned on. We put him on my predetermined point on the floor, and now we can go around and we can look. And it's going to be a bit dim. I'll get you close-ups later on. This is exactly at 4 inches. And this is exactly at 4 inches. And this is exactly at 4 inches. That 4-inch number is really pretty arbitrary. It was just a good middle ground between too low and too high. If I choose too low a number, I end up having to do a lot more grinding to bring the height of the floor down. If I choose too high a number, I end up having to do a lot more filling, which costs a lot extra on self-leveling concrete. Now that sounds like it's backwards, but I'll show you here how that makes sense. So like I said, that 4-inch number is pretty arbitrary, and it's not even exactly where this laser sits relative to its spot on the floor. This is right around 4 3/16 here. Now, if it seems a little counterintuitive as to why when I say if I choose too small a number, I have to do more grinding, let's put this block in underneath here to simulate the floor getting raised up a bit. And you'll notice that when the floor gets raised up, the number that I read with my laser line gets smaller. So I'm at about 3.5 now, instead of 4 3/16. If we can imagine that the floor goes lower and we just pull a little bit of extra tape out, then the number gets bigger, and that's me needing to put more self-leveling concrete in. So it's a little counterintuitive. Smaller number, higher floor, bigger number, lower floor. So before I leveled out all the way back that way, I made sure that I marked on the floor as close as I could to the base of my laser level, so every time I had to come back here, because I can't get anything done in one day, I could always put the laser back in about the same spot. If it's turned a little bit, that's okay. We're just going for the height here. And the thickness of the laser anyway gets to be a little fuzzy, especially when we get down this far. So the next step for me was to go every 6 or 8 or 12 inches and walk around with my measuring tape and say, okay, that's about 3 7/8. So this is higher than my 4 inches. This will have to get ground down. Then I come over here. That's also about 3 7/8. And I mark it on the floor everywhere. Every time I take a measurement, I mark it on the floor. And this starts to build me a picture of the shape of the floor, where I need to build it up and where I need to cut it down. So here at about 3 3/4, that's got to get cut down. I'm going to have to cut off the top layer of this subfloor that I put on a little while ago. But back here at 4 3/16, that's going to have to get raised up. So I do that all over the floor, and that gives me a really good picture of where I need to build up and where I need to cut down. Then over on the table saw, I can cut out a whole bunch of different thicknesses of strips of wood. And it really doesn't matter what kind of wood I'm using. I've got some finger jointed pine here left over from some shelf building. And then I can say, all right, well, I've got some 1/4 inch. I've got some 1/4 inch here. I've got some 3/8 here. I've got some 1/2 inch here. And I can use these different thicknesses laid down on the floor. This is about 1/8. I can put these down on the floor, nail them down to the floor, and then come along with my planer and get them to be all exactly at the perfect height. So this I had measured at about 4 1/16. So this with the extra 1/8 is too tall. I'm gonna have to plane that down. The goal with putting these all down is to get them so that all the way along, they're just a little bit too high. If it's a little too high, I can bring it down to exactly the level I want with a planer. So this one is at 4 5/16. So I am too low still. So instead of the 1/8 inch thickness here, I would come along with the 1/4 inch thickness and I would put that in instead. And now I'm just about a 32nd to a 16th too high, and I'll be able to work that down with my planer. So I'll be using different thicknesses, and it's gonna look a little bit chunky and blocky until I can come along with my thickness planer and smooth everything out. The goal in the end is to have something right at 4 inches. Then I can come along and say, we'll come out 7 feet from there and put another one. So we'll get this one set 7 feet apart from that one, and we'll get them both parallel to that wall. I'll snap some lines and make it all nice and pretty. We'll get the heights all set out. We'll get it all planed down. And the 7 feet comes from, I can get 8 foot long factory edge piece of MDF plywood, who cares, it'll be straight. And I can use that edge and this edge as top markers for screeding. So screeding is just taking a long piece of something that you know is relatively flat and running it over top of whatever material you want to be smooth. Kind of just like shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Those will be nailed down so they won't move. Shuffle it all the way along and get it as level and as flat as possible. Yes, it's called self-leveling concrete. No, don't trust it to be self-leveling. It doesn't self-level very well. The manufacturer says that this stuff can flow between 1/8 and 1 full inch in a single pour. It absolutely does not do that. If you want to get it down to 1/8, it requires tooling. And if you're tooling, you might as well go all the way down to a feather edge. So if you want to do a really good job of it, and if you're going to spend 30 bucks or more a bag, then you better want to do a good job of it. Take the time, screed it out. It'll be much better that way. Once it's all screeded out, I have found that it doesn't like to get up to edges of things very well. You can put in as much as you want, and as soon as you've run your screed over it, you'll find there's a little bit of a dip. It's usually about a 1/16 of an inch. And then I can come along like I did here with a multi-tool, I call it a hand wasp, and just trim off the very top of that little piece of wood. And there is no edge left here at all. So then we can get into some time lapse. You'll see a little bit more what I'm doing firsthand and what the actual process is. It is a chore, it takes a long time, it's a big fuss, and it's worth it. One of the big reasons it's worth it is, especially on a house where I've got from 3 7/8, so that's a 1/8 inch off of 4, 3 3/4, so we're a 1/4 inch high of 4, down to, let's see, 4 1/4. I've got a 1/2 inch low from there to here. From 4 1/4 to 3 3/4, that's a 1/2 inch difference. You got to make that up somehow. It's just like a really small concrete form. That's pretty good. I had to start by cutting out some of the high points in the floor, and before I could cut it out, I wanted to get all the screws out so that I didn't cut any screws, and so that once it was cut, I could easily just lift it up. I was a little bit surprised by what a poor job the PL, I think it was 400 subfloor adhesive did when holding this stuff down, because it really just didn't. These things came up without any fuss once I got the screws out. After a quick cleanup, I got to go around and rehammer all of the nails that had been pulled up a little bit and put all the screws right back in to keep the original floorboards tight to the floor joists. With that little section cleared out, I could get the last of my little itty bitty forms in and start clearing stuff out of the way. The next thing was to get all of my little mini forms planed down so that they would be exactly the height that I wanted them to be. I don't have proper adapters for my shop vac to my tools, so I just end up using a lot of tuck tape to keep things held together. Unfortunately, this leads to things getting clogged a lot, which means I have to re-clean the hose, re-clean the floor, re-clean all the things before I can really get back to work. I spent a little bit of time putting together the dust shroud that I bought off Amazon that had all the best reviews for keeping dust out of the air when you're grinding concrete, and found out immediately that they were all fake, bought, or lies because this thing didn't work worth a darn. That's when I ended up going and building my Dust Fusser 2.0, video linked in the description. For a screed, I decided to go and buy a 1" by 3" aluminum square tubing. This thing was straighter than you would believe and probably only cost me 20 or 30 bucks. As far as a concrete screed goes, these things normally cost 100 bucks plus, and this is basically exactly the same thing. It ended up being one of the most useful tools I had for the rest of the build. The last step of prep before being able to prime everything was getting all of the holes filled. And because this was original 1958 floorboards underneath the new subfloor that I put everywhere, that meant a lot of gaps. And so I went around with probably a half dozen tubes of caulk and filled every single gap. All of a sudden it was the next day and it was time to prime things. This is me priming things. What do you say about priming other than look, watch me go. It's a time lapse. Here we go, zoom. So much priming, so fast. I did end up doing 2 coats on this, I think. We'll find out in a minute, I guess. Look, I was right, I did 2 coats. Imagine that. Moose followed the instructions. Okay, watch out the window really quick because it's kind of fun how quickly the sun sets at these northern Canadian latitudes. This stuff is doable as one person. I did the entire back end of the house as just one person, but it is faster and easier to do it with a little bit of help. So here's Sam to come in to help and to argue politics. I had to cut out a lot of Santas standing around wanting to argue politics. But here we go. This is the actual installation, I guess you can call it an installation. This is the pour, except there's lots of little pours, lots of buckets full, and there we go, screeding along with the aluminum straight edge. The instructions call for rolling around with the little pokey rake, so I did that. I also had a little foam spreading tool here to just help move stuff around in little sections and where it was awkward to get to at the end of a run. Anytime I finish concrete work, I spend a lot of time cleaning, especially on these one-time use tools like the rubber squeegee. I don't want to have to rebuy them when I'm going to be using them again the next day.